Welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and this is 10 cards you should be putting in your Commander decks, episode 11. And we are starting out with a card that I recently put in one of my own Commander decks, and I'm glad I did. I've been trying to use it for a while, find a place for it, because it is a difficult card to find a specific deck where it fits, but it is a really unique and really powerful ability, so I have to give it a mention on this series. Divine Presence, 2 and a white enchantment. If a source would deal 4 or more damage to a permanent or player, that source deals 3 damage to that permanent or player instead. Of course, this is a replacement effect, so it will replace any effect that is dealing 4 or more damage. You cannot deal more than 3 damage to anything from any source as long as this guy is on the battlefield. That is an incredibly powerful effect. Someone cast a Blasphemous Act. Guess what? It's not dealing 13 damage to each creature. It's only dealing 3 damage to each creature. Your opponent attacks with a Crater Hoof. Guess what? All their creatures are now only dealing 3 damage. That's a really powerful effect, right? Don't like Aetherflux Reservoir? Guess what? They're paying 50 life to deal only 3 damage to any target. So this can shut down a lot of stuff, and in particular, a lot of win cons that we see in the Commander format. But where are you going to put it in your own decks, right? I put this in my Benny Brax deck. The reason why is that's kind of a white weenie deck, right? I got lots of little creatures, sort of a go wide strategy. So there's not really a downside here for me. This is, I'm shutting down a lot of things my opponents are doing, and it doesn't really hurt me. That's where I want to play a card like this, I think. I've also said before, I think it's a pretty good fit in a Zur the Enchanter deck because, of course, Zur can go fetch it. It's a 3-mana enchantment. And unless you're doing the Voltron-y style of Zur, where you want to make your Zur really big and do the Voltron strategy, obviously this is not going to be a good fit there. But if you're not doing it, I think it's a great fit in a Zur deck because you probably don't care how much damage your Zur is dealing. Pretty interesting card. Another great card for that Zur the Enchanter deck. Diplomatic Immunity. I think this is probably an auto-include for Zur the Enchanter decks. 1 and a white enchantment aura, enchant creature. Shroud, an enchanted creature has Shroud. So of course, this actual card has Shroud, and the creature it is enchanting also has Shroud. So your creature can't be targeted by anything, and also your opponents can't get rid of the Diplomatic Immunity with their Croson Grip so that they can then target your creature, right? It's a great way to protect your creature. Of course, if you don't want to be targeting your creature with stuff, don't want to be putting this in a Voltron deck, obviously, because then you can't target your own creature. Of course, I just said put it in that Zur Voltron strategy, though. Why? Because funny enough, Zur gets around Shroud. When you go fetch an enchantment and put it directly into play with Zur's ability, it sort of slides on to your Zur. So if your Zur has a Diplomatic Immunity on it, it gets around the Shroud, funny enough. Just sort of a weird interaction there with auras. So keep that in mind as well if you're all thinking of putting this in your deck. But if you don't at all plan on targeting your commander with anything, this is a great way to protect it. Dingus Staff, 4 mana artifact. Whenever a creature dies, Dingus Staff deals 2 damage to that creature's controller. Another one of these great old effects that hits everybody. I love these symmetrical effects. They don't do this nearly enough anymore. Everything is just affect your opponents and no one else so that you don't have to worry about the downside at all. Obviously, this can be a really powerful effect. If you're not playing creatures, this could be a good fit in your deck because obviously it only hurts your opponents. I did this with my Deragaz reincarnated deck that I made. That was sort of a hating on creature strategy. My commander was the only creature in that deck. And also, he has a replacement effect when he dies. If Deragaz reincarnated would die, instead exile it with 3 egg counters on it. So, of course, gets around the dies trigger, so you don't have to worry about that. So you won't be taking 2 damage from your own commander if it dies. If you just have a strategy where you are killing your opponent's creatures all the time, though, probably a pretty good fit. Dingus Egg, second verse, same as the first, except with land. So this one probably is going to fit in a lot less places, but can fit in certain commander decks. 4 mana artifact when a land is put into a graveyard from the battlefield. Dingus Egg deals 2 damage to that land's controller. So exact same thing, except now we're dealing with lands. So obviously is probably going to fit in a lot less commander decks than the Dingus Staff, because of course, not a lot lot of commander decks, at least casual ones, are going after your opponent's lands. Maybe though, this might fit in your deck if you have that specific strategy. Let me know in the comments below if you actually are playing this card in your deck and how you're using it. Coming in at number 5, Demir Doppelganger, one of my personal favorites. 1 blue and a black, Shapeshifter 0/2. Pay 1 blue and a black, exile target card from a graveyard. Demir Doppelganger becomes a copy of that card, except it has this ability. I love this card for a multitude of reasons. I don't think it sees nearly enough play. It is a card that, as I say all the time, you can use on your opponents or yourself, which makes it so much better. I think the main way you're going to be using this is it's sort of a reanimation option. A lot of people might say they don't love it because it exiles the card from a graveyard. So if I chuck a big creature in my graveyard, I'm going to exile it and turn Demir Doppelganger into it, so you'll never get it back. I think that's okay. I think the upside here of only paying 3 mana to get, say, a Razaketh in play seems worth it to me. But the reason I really love this card is it is also graveyard hate, which is really kind of a funny way to use it. My opponent has their Razaketh in their graveyard. They're about to reanimate it. 3 mana at instant speed, obviously. I exile it in response. They now don't get their Razaketh. They've wasted their reanimate, and now I have a Razaketh in play. That seems pretty good, right? Next up, this is a real funny one, and I think it is time to finally give this card a mention because it might actually be worth it. Dogged Hunter, 2 and a white, human, nomad, 1/1. Tap to destroy target creature token. That's it. Just a creature that taps to destroy target creature token. Very niche, obviously very, very niche. I don't know if there is a specific commander where you would want to fit this in. It's a human, so I guess it would fit maybe in a human tribal. If you wanted to try it out, that could be a place to try it out. I just think that the token themes have so taken over the format now that it is likely that every commander game you play, you will be seeing creature tokens. I know it's Fringe, it's a very niche card, but it is super, super unique. And I got to give it a mention because I don't know if there's any other card that specifically does this. Just a creature that taps to destroy target creature token. If you got a guy in play group who plays those token creature decks a lot, this could be a good option against them. And a pretty funny one too as well, I think. Next up, another personal favorite of mine, Disciple of Deceit. Blue and a black human rogue. When Disciple of Deceit becomes untapped, you may discard a non-land card. If you do, search your library for a card with the same mana value as that card, reveal it and put in your hand, then shuffle. This is a great repeatable tutor, I think. Obviously, the best fit here is likely in a discard theme. If you're in a blue-black deck that is discarding regularly, this is a way to get a discard, but also a way to get a tutor, so it's win-win for you. Of course, you have to get your Disciple of Deceit to tap so that it can then untap. That could be tough, possibly. You know, do you want to actually build your deck around that? Do you already have tap options in your deck that you could be tapping this down in other ways? Clearly, the best way to tap this is to attack with it. It's a 1/3, so that might be a little tough. Certainly, that is the drawback of this ability, although I would say the upside here of what you're doing is worth it, especially in a discard theme where it's win-win for what you're doing here. Does this fit in your deck? If so, you're probably getting a lot of great value out of it. Here's an interesting card from the Jurassic World collection. If you don't like Universes Beyond cards, skip to number 9. If you don't care either way, I think this is actually a really great board wipe. 3 white sorcery. Destroy all tapped creatures until your next turn. Whenever a creature becomes tapped, destroy it. Pretty flavorful as well, but this is destroying all tapped creatures. It's a sorcery, so of course you're doing it on your turn, so you're not hitting any of your creatures. Now, it is possible you're not going to hit all of your opponent's creatures, but if you just hit a bunch of them, it seems like pretty good value. If I just have 5 or 6 creatures that my opponents control that are tapped, I'm destroying all of them. That's pretty good value for a 5-mana board wipe, I think. Obviously, just like with most board wipes, you're going to cast it at the most opportune time for yourself, right? You're not going to cast this when your opponent have no tapped creatures. You're going to wait until they have lots of creatures tapped to use it. Until your next turn, though, whenever a creature becomes tapped, destroy it. So maybe this is extra good in a pillow fort strategy where you're not attacking, you don't care about that, you don't want your opponents attacking. So not only is this going to destroy all their creatures that are already tapped, it's also going to hold them off for a turn because likely when they're attacking with their creatures, they're going to be tapped and then immediately get destroyed. So pretty good board wipe for a pillow fort strategy, I think. Next up, Distant Memories. All right, hear me out on this card because I know a lot of people are going to tell me it's awful, but might be really good in that political sphere. 2 blue sorcery. Search your library for a card and exile it. Then shuffle. Any opponent may have you put that card into your hand. If no player does, you draw 3 cards. So I think the worst case scenario here is 4 mana, draw 3 cards, right? That's a Harmonize. A lot of people still play Harmonize in the format. If you consider Harmonize to be a good draw option, Distant Memories is at worst that, but can be a lot better. And again, in the politics situation, it can be fantastic. Just wheel and deal with somebody, right? Any opponent may have you put that card into your hand. You have 2 opponents that don't want you to have that card. Don't care. All you need is 1 opponent to put that card into your hand. Why would they do that? Well, they're going to go grab a board wipe, right? Something like that. One of those situations where my 1 opponent has that really pesky thing we got to get off the board, or 1 opponent who's just got a giant army, and if we don't destroy it right away, we're all dead. That's where this card really shines, in my opinion. You search for a card that is an answer to the current situation, and one of your opponents, you already know they're going to put it into your hand, right? And again, worst case scenario, if that situation doesn't arise, I can just pay 4 mana to draw 3 cards. Not bad. And lastly today, I will talk about Dimensional Breach, which, a lot of people might look at this card and think it's awful. I think it's actually pretty interesting. For all those people who are like, oh, it's just going to drag the game out. Okay, maybe you want to skip over this one. For anybody who doesn't mind playing long Commander games and likes funny, interesting cards, this is certainly one. 5 white sorcery. Exile all permanents. For as long as any of those cards remain exiled, however, at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player returns one of the exiled cards they own to the battlefield. I actually think this makes for an interesting game. I know a lot of people will look at this and think, oh, it's just going to drag the game out. If somebody has a Blightsteel Colossus in play, it's not going to drag the game out at all. And in fact, it's going to be over really soon. In fact, this could be a way that you win with a card like this, right? I got a Blightsteel Colossus in play. I exile all permanents, so there's nothing in play. On my first upkeep, I choose one of the cards exiled with it. I'm going to choose my Blightsteel Colossus. I'm going to put it in play. And what are my opponents going to do, right? I guess they could put their best creature in play, but is it going to be better than my Blightsteel Colossus? Not likely. So yeah, this could drag the game out, but it also could be a win con in a lot of decks. And in fact, it was a win con in a deck that I made, my Nadir deck, where Nadir loves Dimensional Breach because of course it has a leaves the battlefield trigger, which will work with Dimensional Breach. If my Nadir is say a 10/10, because I've been piling counters on it, I cast Dimensional Breach, I exile my commander, and then of course, when it leaves the battlefield, I will create 10 elf tokens. Now, that's not a Blightsteel Colossus, but geez, I'll probably close out the game pretty quick with 10 elf tokens and my opponent's not really having anything, right? So it is a win con in a situation like that. I think it could be fun though. Just cast this. I would have no problem with someone casting this in a Commander game, and let's figure out, I got like 15 cards in exile and I have to think about, on my upkeep, what do I want to put in play? And depending on what your opponents are playing also is going to depend on what you play, right? So your opponent throws that Blightsteel Colossus in play. On my turn, I got a Ghostly Prison in exile. I'll throw that in play so they can't attack me because they don't have any lands, right? It sort of becomes a bit of a sub game, where everyone's figuring out what they should put in play depending on what their other opponents are putting in play. I actually think it's pretty interesting. Can be a neat way to end a Commander game as well. That is it. That is all. 10 more cards that I think you guys should give consideration for with your Commander decks. That is it for today, though, and thanks for tuning in.